Han Li busied himself for 3 days and 3 nights, constructing a hexagonal array at the center of the flying carriage. The array wasn't overly complex, but all of the lines and runes intertwining with one another on its surface were still enough to strike the beholder with a sense of disorientation. On each node of the hexagonal array was a hole about the same thickness of a thumb, and there were dozens of these holes littered throughout the entire array. Han Li swept his gaze over the array momentarily, then took a deep breath before pulling out a series of immortal origin stones and slotting them into these holes. After that, he swept a sleeve through the air to release an incantation seal, and the entire array instantly lit up amid a faint, buzzing sound. The immortal origin stones embedded into the array began to tremble slightly, while releasing bursts of spiritual light, which flowed through the lines on the array like blood before converging to a connective point at the center of the array. A ball of radiant white light that was giving off astonishing spiritual power fluctuations emerged over that point on the array. And these spiritual power fluctuations were at the high zenith stage. Han Li finally heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing this. The array fully lived up to the description that Phoenix 19 had provided, and it was worth all of the resources and effort that he had poured into it. However, as expected, it was burning through immortal spiritual power at an extraordinary rate. And Han Li could sense the immortal spiritual power in the immortal origin stones in the array rapidly seeping away. It was clear that this set of several dozen immortal origin stones wasn't going to be able to last very long. Unfortunately, there were no other feasible options available to Han Li, and he stowed Taoist Shy away before chanting an incantation while making a hand seal. The ball of white light at the center of the array instantly began to elongate, transforming into a pillar of white light that infused itself into the flying carriage. The spirit patterns on the flying carriage immediately began to glow several times more radiantly than they had back when Han Li was piloting the carriage. And the green light barrier around the carriage also began to churn violently before transforming into a radiant green cloud. The speed of the flying carriage was enhanced by several-fold, and it lurched forward at a terrifying speed while trembling uncontrollably. This was because the flying carriage was traveling so quickly that Han Li was no longer able to fully control it. The abrupt onset of turbulence gave both Jin Tong and Xiao Bai a huge fright, and they were snapped awake from their naps before hurriedly stabilizing themselves for fear of being thrown off the carriage. Han Li wore a solemn expression as he made a rapid string of hand seals, doing everything in his power to control the flying carriage. As time slowly passed, he gradually grew accustomed to the carriage's newfound speed, and only then did he relax a little. The speed of the flying carriage had instilled him with some confidence that they would be able to escape from the gold-devouring immortal that was pursuing them. Jin Tong, from now on, stay in Xiao Bai's stomach as much as possible to minimize the duration that the gold-devouring beetle can detect you. As for the soul armor talismans, save those for when we encounter some real danger, Han Li instructed. Jin Tong was aware of the gravity of the situation, so she obediently obliged without raising a fuss, flying into Xiao Bai's mouth as a streak of golden light. Meanwhile, Han Li sat down with his legs crossed, piloting the flying carriage with a contemplative look on his face. Even though Jin Tong now had the resources to remain in Xiao Bai's stomach for a longer duration of time, and the flying carriage's speed had also been greatly enhanced, he was still feeling very concerned at the prospect of having to face a late high zenith stage gold-devouring immortal. The only way he could ensure that they would be able to survive this ordeal would be if he could also become a Jade Immortal, but that was clearly impossible. Even though he had a huge supply of all types of pills, it was virtually impossible to even reach the late Golden Immortal stage in a short time, let alone the High Zenith stage. With that in mind, Han Li's brows became tightly furrowed with concern. However, a thought then suddenly occurred to him, and he flipped a hand over to produce a green gourd amid a flash of green light. It was the profound heavenly treasure that he had taken from Q Ling. After leaving the Infernal Frost Immortal Manor, he had constantly been busy with various affairs, and he had almost forgotten about this treasure. He looked at the green gourd in his hand for a moment, then swept a sleeve through the air to release a series of streaks of azure light, which revealed themselves to be a set of array flags that landed near Xiaobai. An azure light barrier then abruptly appeared, encompassing the startled Xiaobai within it. Immediately thereafter, Hanli raised his hand, and the green gourd immediately rose up to hover in midair while giving off bursts of gentle green light. Hanli injected his spiritual sense into the green space within the gourd, and it was no different from how it had been in the past. The green space was still filled with green light that was slowly revolving to form a massive green vortex, at the center of which was a small azure sword and a miniature 3-story pavilion. These were the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword and the pavilion Immortal treasure that he had placed in the gourd to test out its powers. At this moment, the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword in the vortex was releasing waves of gentle azure light, and the enormous spiritual power within it had become far purer and more restrained, as was the case with the miniature pavilion treasure. Some time later, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the gourd as a contemplative look appeared on his face. Given how the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword and the pavilion treasure were both still unharmed after spending so much time in the gourd, it was clear that immortal treasures could be stored in the gourd without any problems. With that in mind, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, summoning 3 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords while pointing a finger at the gourd. A burst of green light flashed over the surface of the gourd, and it released a streak of green light out of its opening to sweep up the 3 flying swords before sucking them in. He repeated this process over and over again, sending his other azure bamboo cloud swarm swords into the gourd in batches, then placed the gourd down onto the ground in front of him. Enhancing his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords wasn't actually the primary reason behind why he had summoned the gourd. As a profound heavenly treasure, this gourd was one of his most precious treasures, second only to his heaven-controlling vial. Even though it didn't seem to be an offensive profound heavenly treasure, it would surely still be a great help against the gold-devouring immortal if he could fully refine it. With that in mind, Han Li turned his gaze to the opening of the gourd to discover that the coloration of the gourd there was slightly lighter than Tai was elsewhere, indicating that it had been picked prior to reaching full maturity. After a brief moment of contemplation, he pulled out his heaven-controlling vial, and there was a drop of faintly glowing green liquid rolling around inside. Han Li gently tipped the vial forward, and the drop of green liquid immediately flowed onto the opening of the gourd, where the lighter coloration was. In the next instant, the green light radiating from the gourd abruptly brightened by several fold, and countless green runes emerged within the light before dancing and churning violently like boiling water. A burst of formidable law power fluctuations erupted out of the gourd before spreading outward, and the nearby world's origin chi was also stirred up into a frenzy, forming balls of spiritual light of different colors. At the moment, the flying carriage was still racing along, and these balls of spiritual light were instantly left behind, forming a dazzling wave of rainbow light behind the carriage. Han Li paid no heed to this as he stared intently at the gourd. The drop of green liquid quivered momentarily on the surface of the gourd, then slowly seeped into it, following which the churning runes around the gourd slowly subsided. He carefully inspected the gourd to find that its outward appearance hadn't changed at all, nor had any changes taken place within its internal space. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, but he wasn't overly disheartened. Back when he infused his profound heavenly spirit/sword with the green spirit liquid, it had taken a very long time for the effects to manifest themselves, so he had to be patient. With that in mind, Han Li rose to his feet and made his way over to a corner of the flying carriage, where he set up a miniature array before placing the heaven-controlling vial into it. After that, he returned to his original spot and sat back down, then opened his mouth to release a burst of azure light, which swept up the green gourd before sucking it back into his body. A month passed by in a flash. Under the starry night sky, the green flying carriage was racing along like a green shooting star, continuing to travel at an extraordinary speed, Down below was a vast mountain range, and at this point they were already far away from the Dark Star Canyon. Han Li was currently looking down at the mountain range below with tightly furrowed brows. Over the past month, he had constantly been keeping tabs on the high zenith stage gold-devouring Immortal through Jin Tong, and according to Jin Tong, it had been rapidly recovering its power of late, indicating that it had most likely already freed itself from the origin separation law chains. Han Li took a glance up at the sky, then strode over the corner of the flying carriage before picking up the heaven-controlling vial and dripping the drop of green liquid inside onto the green gourd. The green gourd began to glow brightly once again, while releasing bursts of formidable law power fluctuations. But just like last time, the gourd returned to normal shortly thereafter. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, and he was just about to set the heaven-controlling vial down onto its original spot when he suddenly raised an eyebrow, then stowed the vial away before rushing over to Xiao Bai. There was a concerned look on Xiao Bai's face as it said, "Master, Jin Tong says. Is it coming after us?" Han Li asked in a grim voice. "Yes. According to Jin Tong, it's coming after us at an even faster speed than our carriage is currently traveling at," Xiao Bai replied. "Faster by how much?" Han Li asked. Xiao Bai was silent for a moment, then replied with a fearful expression, "About twice as fast." Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and he flipped a hand over to produce the soul armor talismans that he had purchased earlier, then tossed all of them into Xiao Bai's mouth, as he instructed. "Jin Tong, stay in there for as long as you can." After that, he turned and began casting a string of incantation seals into the flying carriage and the hexagonal array on the ground. The flying carriage immediately began to glow even brighter, as it abruptly swiveled around and set off in a different direction.